Hey everybody, welcome to the Divided Kingdom Notes when the golden age of Israel comes to an end. A little bit of it is complicated, but not too much so. So let's dive right in. The Divided Kingdom of Israel, the who, the what, and the why. So first, the who. The first major player is Rehoboam, Solomon's son. Rehoboam, Solomon's son. What makes this a little confusing is that the other king, major player, is Jeroboam, a skilled leader under Solomon. And you see those two names are a bit similar with the endings, which can complicate things. So Rehoboam, Solomon's son, and then Jeroboam, a skilled leader under Solomon. In fact, while Solomon was alive and promoting Jeroboam, a prophet of the Lord told Jeroboam that he would be the king of Israel. Solomon heard about this. Jeroboam took off, fled to Egypt, and then after Solomon died, Jeroboam returned. Now, what happened when the kingdom divided? Well, Rehoboam had two tribes in the south. That would be Judah and Benjamin, but we usually just say Judah because Benjamin was very small. So Rehoboam, two tribes in the south, and then Jeroboam became king over the 10 tribes in the north. Jeroboam has 10 tribes in the north. And why did this happen? Well, the human reason was because of the high taxes from Solomon and then the continued threat of high taxes from Solomon's son Rehoboam. So the 10 northern tribes said, essentially, we're out of here, we're not following you. But the real underlying spiritual reason for this division was unfaithfulness and idolatry on the part of the kings and the people. So why the division? Human reason, high taxes, spiritual reason, unfaithfulness, and idolatry. Now, this next slide is not in your notes, but I wanted to show you on the MAP here. Here is Judah, southern kingdom, and then here is Israel, the northern kingdom. Now, this gets a little complicated, so what I would do is draw this little chart in your notes off to the right there, okay? And what we have here is Israel and this is the United Kingdom, the UK, not in Europe today, the UK of Israel. And the kings here were Saul, David, and Solomon. But the golden age of Israel was really with David and Solomon when they had peak military power and also economic prosperity. Now, because of unfaithfulness at the end of King Solomon's reign for the king and the people, the consequence was that God had the kingdom split in two, which meant they were not as strong. So what we have, and here's how it gets a little complicated, is then, I'm going to do blue. Then we have Israel, and this is the northern kingdom, and the first king was Jeroboam. That says Jeroboam. And then we have Judah in the south, and this is the southern kingdom, and Rehoboam was the king here. So you see that Israel, during Saul, David, and Solomon, is united in everyone. But after the division, mostly when you read the word Israel, that means the northern kingdom, not everybody. And then, separately, you have Judah in the south, and the line of David actually goes through Judah in the south. So their dynasty was much more stable. In the north, there were lots of dynasties and much more chaotic. All right, so that's kind of an important point there, and hopefully that's more understandable with this little chart. Now, we're going to just take a look briefly at Israel, Northern Kingdom. All kings in the north were unfaithful to God and to the covenant. All kings unfaithful to God and to the covenant. The next note here is that in this biblical history, the biblical focus is on the kings and the people's response to the covenant. So it's not necessarily which kings had the greatest military might or the longest reign, but the focus was on response to the covenant. So that's how the Bible's focus on history with Israel, Northern Kingdom. Now, the first king, as I said, of Israel, Northern Kingdom, was Jeroboam. And this is really important that he promotes the worship of golden calves. One of the reasons why it's important is because this practice stays with Israel throughout the years that they were a kingdom. Jeroboam and his dynasty died off. Many other dynasties came, but the golden calves stayed. Even though a prophet of the Lord told Jeremiah that by God's decree he would become king, when he eventually becomes king, he turns away from God and promotes the worship of golden calves. So what happens here, this is a map again of the Northern Kingdom, and here is basically the dividing line. They didn't have an all-out civil war, but they did have a lot of military skirmishes with this dividing line here. But here's what happened. When Jeroboam became king, all of his subjects were used to going to Jerusalem, which I just drew the line over. Jerusalem's right there. They were used to going to Jerusalem for yearly pilgrimage and worship at the temple. But Jeroboam did not want his people crossing this line going to Jerusalem, because then they might think, well, we should have loyalty to the line of David. He wanted to keep his people in his territory. So instead of trusting in God, he came up with a political plan to keep his people in place, which appears wise, but actually he was being unfaithful to God. So what he did is he established a golden calf in Bethel and in Dan. And he told his people, don't go to Jerusalem to worship. For your yearly family vacation worship pilgrimage, just go to Bethel or go to Dan. And I've created 2 easy, convenient locations for you to go. And so the people who were used to going on worship pilgrimages actually listened to Jeroboam, and this is what they did. However, he was leading his people in unfaithfulness. Now, there's many kings. There's only one other king I'd like us to take a look at, and that is Ahab. And one of the reasons why there's a lot in the Bible on Ahab is because this is the time of Elijah. And so you have here Elijah's call to covenant faithfulness, and then Ahab's rejection of covenant faithfulness. So Ahab's great evil before God, he brought Baal worship into Israel. So worshiping the golden calves, that was bad. But then bringing a foreign god from Phoenicia in the north end was even worse. And this was through Ahab's famous marriage to Jezebel, the wicked queen Jezebel. So, what does Elijah do? God instructs Elijah to have a prophecy, no dew or rain. No dew or rain. And this was not merely to make life difficult for the people. The point of no dew or rain was to say Baal is nothing. Why did they worship Baal in the first place? They worshiped Baal because he was a fertility god, so that more rain would come and it would increase their food supply. So essentially Elijah's saying, oh, you trust in Baal? Well, guess what? No dew or rain. He's powerless. Then we come to the showdown on Mount Carmel, which Elijah proves once again that Baal is nothing. This showdown on the mountain was the prophets of Baal versus Elijah. And the contest was the prophets of Baal, and then Elijah would offer a sacrifice and pray to either Baal or Elijah prayed to God, and whichever God answered by fire was the true God. And in this story, we see unanswered prayer versus answered prayer. The prophets of Baal prayed for hours, even cut themselves to show sacrifice to Baal, and there was no fire to their altar. Elijah, on the other hand, soaked his altar with water, the point making it harder to light. Then he prays, and then God sends fire onto Elijah's altar. So ultimately, this is Baal versus God, and God wins. Now, you might think this is kind of dumb to worship idols like this, but when you think about it, we have our own issues in life. So I have a little story for you. Here are two guys, Bob and Bill. Now, Bob really liked Sally, and Bill was just a friend of Bob, and that was it. So this was, let's say, spring or summertime when it got dark out later. And one Friday night, Bill had nothing to do, so he called up Bob, says, hey, you want to get together? And Bob says, oh, I can't. I got a date with Sally. So Bill decides, since he was by himself, he thought to himself, I'm just going to spend some time in prayer. I haven't done that in a while. So Bill spent some time in prayer. Meanwhile, Bob goes on his date with Sally, and look, on the date, they hold hands. Oh, yes, yes. So Bob has some romance going on here with Sally. So they went for a walk in the park. And so that was very nice. It was a beautiful evening, and the trees and the birds and the holding hands on the path. Meanwhile, what was Bill doing? He was praying. Now, why do I say this? I say this because romance can produce very strong feelings. Prayer, sometimes we feel close to God, sometimes we don't. But because romance produces strong feelings, often people will begin to actually trust in romance more than God. Romance is a good thing from God, but it can easily become more important than God, and it becomes an idol in somebody's life. So even though we don't worship idols like they did in the Old Testament, we still have many things in our world that tempt us to become number one before God. Now we're going to take a look at one of the prophets during the time of the divided kingdom. Obviously, prophecy is a huge portion of the Old Testament, and for the sake of our class, we're just going to take a look at one prophet that, in some senses, is representative of the other prophets. So this is Hosea, and you see where it places him in history. Now, what God asked Hosea to do. Hosea is a godly prophet of the Lord. What he asked him to do was marry a promiscuous woman. We don't know exactly what that means, but essentially it means that God is asking him to marry a woman that is likely to cheat on him in marriage. So not real good going in. They have a son, and the son is named Jezreel. And why? Like, hey, Dad, why did you name me Jezreel? Well, son, you're named after a bloodbath, a complete massacre. Oh, thanks, Dad. Then they had a daughter, and her name was Lo Ruhamah. Daddy, what does my name mean? Your name means you were an unloved person in the family. Ah! Okay, again, not really too nice. And then they have another son right here, and his name is Lo Ami. Hey, Dad, what does my name mean? Your name means not my people. You're not part of our family, kid. So anyway, their three children's names were prophetic about the nation of Israel, that they had sinned greatly before God, and God was calling them not loved, not my people. However, God is also a God of grace. And so you see here that the Israelites, okay, you will be called children of the living God. And you will, the people of Judah and Israel will be unified again. And Jezreel will not be known as a bloodbath, it'll be known as a great place. And also, that little girl, her name will be changed to my loved one, and the boy's name will be changed to my people. And then, sure enough, Hosea's wife deserts him. She goes and lives with another guy, commits adultery, and then he kicks her out. And so the Lord said to me, Hosea, go show love to your wife again, though she is loved by another man and is an adulteress. Love her as the Lord loves, this is God's grace, loves the Israelites, though they turn to other gods, idol worship, and they love the sacred raisin cakes. If you're at Jewel this week and you see the sacred raisin cakes, keep walking by. Do not stop. Don't be tempted. Anyway, apparently this had to do with idol worship back in the day. The point is turning to other gods. So what happens? Hosea's wife, Gomer, is on a slave block, and Hosea is walking through town, and he buys her back for 15 shekels of silver and some food. She does not deserve this at all. But he shows her amazing grace and says, you are to live with me many days, and essentially, I am going to love you again. A beautiful picture of God's grace. So what's going on here? First, marriage and children. Hosea marries Gomer, and he has 3 kids. This is what I just explained. Next, there is sin. Gomer is unfaithful in their marriage. There is sin. Gomer is unfaithful in their marriage. And then there is grace. Hosea buys Gomer back and remains married. So there is grace. Hosea buys Gomer back and remains married. Prophetically, what's going on? It's prophetic symbolism. Hosea equals God and Gomer equals Israel. God's covenant with Israel is so sacred. It is supposed to be so committed and so tight that God compares it to marriage that should be so sacred, so committed, and so tight. So when Israel cheats on God with idol worship, it's like they're breaking the marriage covenant. So you see here there are consequences for unfaithfulness in the marriage. However, thank the Lord, he is also a God of grace. What happens next? Does Israel repent? No, they do not. What happens next? The Assyrians attack and conquer Israel, and the Israelites are sent into exile because of unfaithfulness to the covenant. What happens next? Assyrians attack and conquer. The Israelites are sent into exile because of unfaithfulness to the covenant. So there you have the notes of the divided kingdom of Israel.